I'd always prided myself on being a good neighbor, the kind who offered a helping hand, kept the lawn meticulously manicured, and waved a friendly hello to everyone I passed. Moving into this suburban oasis had been a dream come true. The house was perfect, the neighborhood was quiet, and the meticulously maintained pool in the backyard was the ultimate reward for years of hard work. I'd imagined countless summer afternoons spent lounging poolside, grilling with friends, and just enjoying the fruits of my labor. What I hadn't imagined was Karen. Karen lived next door, and from the moment I moved in, there was something off about her. The first encounter was innocuous enough. She introduced herself with a tight, almost forced smile, and asked about my profession. When I told her I was a software engineer, her eyebrows arched slightly, a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher crossing her face. It was subtle, dismissible, but it stuck with me. Then came the accidental encounters. She'd mistakenly come onto my property while gardening, her eyes lingering on the pool. She'd thought she'd seen her cat in my yard, again, her gaze drawn to the shimmering water. I tried to brush it off, attributing it to harmless neighborliness, but the feeling persisted, a low hum of unease vibrating beneath the surface of my calm. The first undeniable intrusion happened on a Saturday afternoon. I was working from home, the rhythmic tapping of my keyboard punctuated by the occasional splash from the pool. Initially, I dismissed it as a bird or a stray branch falling into the water. But the splashes continued, growing louder, more persistent. Curiosity piqued, I walked to the back window overlooking the pool. What I saw made my blood run cold. A young boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, was splashing around in my pool. He wasn't alone. Karen stood on the deck, arms crossed, a smug look on her face. I rushed outside, my voice tight with barely controlled anger. Karen! What in the world is going on? Who is this child, and why are they in my pool? Her expression shifted, the smugness replaced by a defiant glare. This is my nephew, Timmy. He loves to swim, and I thought he could use a little fun. It's just a pool, John. Don't be so stingy. Stingy? This was my property, my private space. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. Karen, I appreciate the thought, but you can't just let your nephew swim in my pool without asking. This is trespassing. He needs to get out now. She huffed, rolling her eyes. Oh, relax. It's not like you're using it. Besides, she said, her voice dripping with condescension, it's good for him to get some exercise. He's been stuck inside all day. I stood my ground, refusing to back down. Karen, I'm asking you politely. Please get your nephew out of my pool and off my property. Reluctantly, she called Timmy out of the water, muttering under her breath about how I was making a big deal out of nothing. As they walked back to her house, I watched them, a knot of anger and frustration tightening in my stomach. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a blatant disregard for my property and my boundaries. This was just the beginning. I installed security cameras after that first incident. I knew, deep down, that Karen wouldn't stop. And I was right. The cameras captured her, clear as day, sneaking onto my property, unlocking the pool gate. I later had to change the locks, and letting Timmy swim while I was at work. The audacity was breathtaking. Each time I confronted her, the excuses grew more ridiculous. Timmy misses his dad, who's deployed overseas, and needs a father figure, so he comes and tells me all about his problems. She said that this was his way of therapy. He said that I need to bring him here because he deserves the right to swim. She just didn't care. Her demeanor was always the same, unapologetic, entitled, and laced with a subtle, yet undeniable, condescension. She seemed convinced that I didn't belong there, that I was somehow less deserving of the beautiful home and the luxurious pool. I tried reasoning with her, explaining the liability issues, the potential dangers of unsupervised swimming, and the simple principle of respecting private property. But my words seemed to bounce off her, as if she couldn't comprehend that my rights were just as valid as hers. One afternoon, I caught her red-handed while working from home. I saw Timmy splashing in the pool through my office window, and Karen was nowhere to be seen. I rushed outside, furious. "Karen! Where are you? You can't just leave him unattended." She emerged from my patio, where she had been sunbathing and was reading a book, a picture of casual disregard. "Oh, he's fine. He's a strong swimmer. That's not the point. He's in my pool, on my property, without my permission. What if something happened to him?" She scoffed. "Nothing's going to happen. You're overreacting. Besides, he loves your pool." That was it. I was done being reasonable. I told her that if she ever set foot on my property again without my explicit permission, I would call the police. I meant it. I started documenting everything, the dates, times, and details of each intrusion, along with the security camera footage. I consulted with a lawyer, who advised me to obtain a restraining order. The process was lengthy and frustrating, but I was determined to protect my property and my peace of mind. The restraining order was finally granted. It prohibited Karen from coming within 100 feet of my property. I hoped that it would be the end of it, but a small part of me knew that Karen was not someone who easily accepted boundaries. Things were quiet for a few weeks after the restraining order was served. I started to relax, thinking that maybe, just maybe, Karen had finally gotten the message. But my hope was short-lived. One morning, I woke up to a pounding on my front door. I opened it to find Karen standing there, her face contorted in a mixture of anger and indignation. "Your pool is too deep," she shrieked, her voice shrill and piercing. "It's dangerous for Timmy." I stared at her, speechless for a moment. "Excuse me? Your pool. It's too deep. He told me he can't touch the bottom in some parts, and it's not safe. You need to fix it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was complaining about the depth of my pool, the pool she had been repeatedly using without my permission, despite the restraining order. "Karen, you are in violation of the restraining order. You need to leave my property immediately," I said, trying to remain calm. She ignored me, continuing her tirade. "You need to make it shallower. You need to make it safe for children. Karen, I am not altering my pool for your nephew. He is not allowed to be here. You are not allowed to be here. Leave. Now." She refused to budge, her voice growing louder and more hysterical. "I'm calling 911. Your pool is a hazard." I knew she was serious. I could see the manic gleam in her eyes, the unhinged determination that seemed to fuel her every action. I braced myself, knowing that this was about to escalate. As she fumbled for her phone, I pulled out my own and began recording the encounter. I knew I needed evidence of her violation of the restraining order and her increasingly erratic behavior. She dialed 911, her voice trembling with fake outrage. "Yes, operator, I need to report a dangerous situation. My neighbor has a pool that's too deep, and it's a threat to children. He's refusing to make it safe." I could hear the operator on the other end, calmly asking for her address and details of the situation. Karen provided the information, her voice laced with self-righteous indignation. "He's a menace. He doesn't care about the safety of children. He needs to be stopped." I shook my head in disbelief. This was beyond ridiculous. This was bordering on delusional. I waited patiently for the police to arrive, knowing that the truth would eventually come out. The police arrived within minutes, sirens wailing, lights flashing. 2 officers approached us, their expressions serious. Karen immediately launched into her story, embellishing the details and casting herself as the concerned protector of innocent children. "Officer, this man's pool is a death trap. It's too deep. My nephew almost drowned. He refuses to fix it, and he's putting children at risk." I calmly stepped forward, holding up my phone. "Officer, I have video evidence of Ms. Karen violating a restraining order. She has repeatedly trespassed on my property and allowed her nephew to swim in my pool without my permission. She is now harassing me and making false claims about the safety of my pool." I showed the officers the video footage of Karen's previous intrusions, her unlocking the pool gate and letting Timmy swim while I was away. I also showed them the restraining order, clearly stating that she was prohibited from being within 100 feet of my property. The officers listened attentively, their expressions growing more serious as they watched the evidence. They then turned to Karen, their tone firm. "Ms. Karen, you are in violation of a restraining order. You are also being accused of trespassing and making false statements. We need you to step away from the property and answer some questions." Karen's face flushed red with anger. "This is ridiculous. I'm just trying to protect children. He's the one who's breaking the law." The officers were unmoved. They placed her under arrest, handcuffing her and leading her to the patrol car. Karen continued to protest, yelling and screaming about how she was being unfairly targeted. As they drove her away, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was finally over. Karen's reign of terror had come to an end. I knew that the legal process was just beginning, but I was confident that justice would be served. The arrest was just the beginning. The police launched a full investigation into Karen's actions, reviewing the evidence I had provided, interviewing witnesses, and piecing together the full extent of her harassment and trespassing. The district attorney took the case seriously, recognizing the pattern of behavior and the blatant disregard for the law. News of Karen's arrest spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some neighbors were shocked, while others admitted that they had long suspected something was amiss. Several neighbors came forward with their own stories of Karen's overbearing behavior and entitled attitude. It seemed that I wasn't the only one who had been subjected to her brand of self-righteousness. Meanwhile, I focused on securing my property and rebuilding my sense of peace. I installed even more security cameras, upgraded the pool gate with a high-tech locking system, and erected a privacy fence along the property line. I also sought therapy to cope with the stress and anxiety that Karen's actions had caused. The legal proceedings against Karen moved swiftly. She was charged with multiple counts of violating a restraining order, trespassing, harassment, and making false statements. Her lawyer attempted to argue that she was simply a concerned neighbor acting out of love for her nephew, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. During the trial, I testified about the repeated intrusions, the constant harassment, and the emotional toll that Karen's actions had taken on me. I recounted the fear and frustration I had felt, the sense of violation and the disruption to my peaceful life. I also presented the video evidence, which clearly showed Karen's disregard for my property and my boundaries. Karen, on the other hand, continued to maintain her innocence, portraying herself as a victim of my unreasonable demands. She claimed that she had only wanted what was best for her nephew and that I was unfairly targeting her because of some unspoken prejudice. But the jury didn't buy it. They saw through her lies and her attempts to deflect blame. After deliberating for several hours, they returned a guilty verdict on all counts. Karen was sentenced to jail time, a significant fine, and mandatory anger management classes. The judge also extended the restraining order, prohibiting her from ever contacting me or coming near my property again. But the legal battle wasn't quite over. I filed a civil lawsuit against Karen, seeking compensation for the damages she had caused. I argued that her actions had resulted in emotional distress, property damage, and financial losses. I also sought punitive damages to punish her for her egregious behavior and deter others from engaging in similar acts. The civil trial was less dramatic than the criminal trial, but it was still an important step in holding Karen accountable for her actions. My lawyer presented evidence of the emotional distress I had suffered, the cost of the security upgrades, and the decrease in my property value due to Karen's harassment. Karen's lawyer attempted to argue that I was exaggerating my damages and that Karen was not responsible for the negative consequences of her actions. But the jury ultimately sided with me, awarding me a substantial sum in damages, including compensation for emotional distress, property damage, and punitive damages. The money was secondary, of course. What mattered most was that justice had been served. Karen had been held accountable for her actions, and I had been vindicated. I could finally move on with my life, knowing that I had stood up for my rights and refused to be intimidated by her prejudice and entitlement. The experience had been incredibly stressful and emotionally draining, but it had also taught me a valuable lesson about the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. It had also reaffirmed my belief in the power of justice and the importance of holding people accountable for their actions. I used a portion of the compensation to upgrade my security system even further, and another portion to create a scholarship fund for underprivileged students in my community. I was determined to turn a negative experience into something positive, to use my story to inspire others to fight for justice and equality. And, of course, I finally got to enjoy my pool in peace.